Hi, welcome to another episode of Professional Spotlight. I'm Pallavi Sharma, the Director of PR and Social Media, Girls in Tech, Minneapolis. And today we have a very smart and talented and ambitious woman with us for this episode of Professional Spotlight. Please welcome Diane Rucker. At the moment, you're a project management consultant at the MIT Trust Center for Entrepreneurship.
Yes, correct.
Yep. So let's talk more about you and a little more about your accomplishments as well. So let's start with the point of going back to your childhood. How did you get interested in the field of technology itself?
It's a great question. It's one I gave some thought to earlier this week. It's really hard to say exactly when it started, but I'll trace it back to when I was about 4 years old. And I had a bike with training wheels on it. And my mom didn't have time to take the training wheels off. She told me we would do it later. And I decided that I would do it myself. So if you can picture a 4-year-old in the garage with a wrench, I guess that's probably where it started.
Yep.
And from then on, it just seemed that I was always interested in math and science, and always interested in the possibilities of what you could do with it. For me, it wasn't just math and science. When I was graduating from high school and thinking about what to do next, I had a lot of other options. I really liked languages. I loved speaking French. I loved the French culture. I liked doing some creative writing and had won a number of prizes in that. But I just kept coming back to math and science and thinking that engineering or being able to solve problems was really something that would be a lot of fun. And I guess the rest is kind of history.
Looks like you have had a very strong background in the STEM field. You earned your bachelor's in material science and engineering from MIT, and also you went on and pursued your master's degree from University of Michigan.
Right, correct.
Yep. And then just last year you finished your executive MBA from MIT.
Yes.
That is amazing. That's amazing. So tell us about how your education and your background, your academics in the STEM field has impacted your professional life and other aspects of your life.
One of the things I like about the STEM fields is that it's not just a matter of learning the science or the technology behind it. It's really learning how to think.
Right.
And I would say that through the course of my studies, that's come up again and again. It's not been a question of what the problem means. It's a question of where do you go with it? How do you take it apart? How do you figure out what the pieces are? And STEM does a really good job of helping you to separate those pieces. And instead of looking at something and accepting it for what it is, you're looking at the component parts of it and trying to figure out how the puzzle works together.
Right.
So I would say that one of the reasons that I went back for each of the different degrees was because there was something more that I needed that I didn't have the skills for. A bachelor's in materials engineering was great. It was really interesting. But what it does is it starts to give you the tool set for what to do. The reason I went back for the master's was because I realized I had just the beginnings of what I wanted and needed a little bit more background in the field. Going back for an executive MBA was actually for a very different reason, but it still applies. Most of the work I'd done in about the last 15 years has been more in either team management or direct management, general management. And there's a different skill set that you need for that. The STEM disciplines give you that element of being able to take a problem and understand its component parts. But what it doesn't give you is the frameworks that you need in the business world to be able to understand how does that problem work in the financial world?
Correct.
How does that problem work when it relates to the strategy that you do? Or how does that problem work with marketing or factory operations? So for me, the desire to go back for the executive MBA was to really, again, take the pieces of the puzzle that I knew and make the framework broader so I could see where the puzzle fit.
All right. So coming back to currently, with the project management consulting work that you're doing, could you tell us a little about it?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So MIT has a program called the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program. It's known just short as REAP, MIT REAP. Maybe not the greatest name, but what the program is they work with different countries, different regions around the world to understand their innovation ecosystem and to help them develop a strategy for changing it. As part of that, what you're looking at is the 5 elements of the ecosystem, and that includes the corporations who are part of the ecosystem, academic institutions, policymakers, risk capital, and of course the entrepreneurs themselves. Each one of them has a role to play in the ecosystem. What MIT does is they bring members from each of those stakeholder groups together in a team, and their goal is to not only find the battle that they need to win for their region, the thing that's most holding them back, but also to develop a strategy and to put that strategy into action. Where I come in as a project management consultant was the opportunity to work with the first cohort of REAP and find out how successful they'd been. Excellent. So we went back to each of the 7 countries that initially participated in the REAP program between 2012 and 2014, did some interviews with each of them, looked back through their journey through the REAP program, which lasts about 2 years, and looked at not only where they were when they started, but where they were 6 months after the program ended. In other words, were they able to change what they decided to do? Were they able to sustain it? Could they keep it going, or did they have problems that were, when they lost the support of the program, did their motivation go away?
Sure.
So the first step was to go back to those 7 regions and understand what are the lessons that each of them learned throughout the program, throughout their journey. And that was amazing for me, not only to get a chance to meet and interact with people from London, people from Singapore, people from Veracruz, Mexico, just incredible places around the world. But also to have the opportunity to put those pieces together.
Right.
The second part of the project that I worked on with MIT has been to take those lessons learned in regions around the world and see what could be applied to the United States. In other words, if you wanted to do something similar in Minneapolis,
right,
or Louisville, Kentucky, or Austin, Texas, would you have the same problems? Would you need the same stakeholders, the same strategies, the same interventions in the system, the same action plans to yield a similar result?
Right, right.
And one of the things I love about it is there's not a single program that works for every region. You can't take Silicon Valley and move it around the world and duplicate it. And the reason you can't is because each region has its own unique identity. And that identity comes from the history, the culture, the people, the types of industries that have grown up in that area. So learning what the strategy is as much about learning what the region's identity is.
There would have been some similarities as well. What for you personally as a project management consultant, what were your top takeaways or have been?
I think the top takeaway above all is that the team is absolutely critical. The team of people that you bring in, if it doesn't represent those 5 stakeholder groups, the corporations, academic, risk capital, policymakers, and entrepreneurs, if you don't have everyone involved, you won't be able to figure out what's been holding you back.
Right.
If you just even get 2 or 3 of them together, you get a skewed viewpoint of the health of the ecosystem. So again, first and foremost, the team that you bring together and their ability to work together is absolutely critical. I think the second piece that was really important for regional change was having a public-private partnership.
Right.
There were some groups that came in with primarily a government-sponsored focus. There were other groups that came in that were more corporate-sponsored, where a leading corporation in a region, for example, Nokia in Finland, would sponsor this type of innovation change to see if they could revive the region, revitalize it. The challenge to that is that if you just have a private sponsorship, or if you just have a public sponsorship, you again fail to take the needs of the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, into account. And I think the third thing, above all else, is that change takes time. It's not easy. There's not a
from the
magic
toughest things.
change that will turn a
Yes.
region overnight from a town in
Yeah.
the middle of nowhere to another Silicon Valley.
Yep, yep.
And recognizing that it takes time and that it takes energy and that it's hard is a very hard thing for a lot of organizations to realize. I mean, think about it from a political standpoint. This change is great, but it's going to take 10 years.
Right.
It's going to be very difficult to sell.
Right, exactly.
But it's the reality of the situation. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
It's going to take work.
Yep. Baby steps. Small
Little
baby steps.
steps and little progress and stepping back to see, did we do anything? Did it make a difference? Have we been successful, or are we just creating some more noise?
Right, right, and that's key. Even finding those metrics and
Right.
and tracking them.
Being
Right.
able to understand what you see in the ecosystem and understand when there's really a
Right.
change. Traditional economic development usually looks at the number of jobs created or the number of new companies started in a region and uses that as a metric to say how healthy the region is. But the problem with each of those metrics is, where are the jobs coming from? And where are the companies that are started lasting? So some better metrics to look at have been the number of scalable jobs that are created, which is there's a difference between a small and medium enterprise, which might be a restaurant or a dry cleaner or maybe like a library service. They're jobs that are primarily for the region. They're not intended to scale outside of the region.
Right.
An innovation-driven enterprise is one in which you can have scalable growth, one where you typically have more energy put into it at the start, but it yields more at the output at the end. So it takes a little time to scale, might take 1 or 2 or 5 years, but after that point, then you start to see the growth in the region that takes it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of entrepreneurship, based on your knowledge and currently whatever you've learned having worked in the Twin Cities, what do you think is the current entrepreneurship trend in Minneapolis, and what are the opportunities and challenges?
So one of the things that's really exciting to me about Minneapolis, and I'll actually say Minneapolis-St. Paul because it's really the greater region,
Right.
is that those 5 stakeholders I mentioned, we have all of those.
Yeah.
We have incredible corporations. We have 19 Fortune 500 companies. We have amazing academic institutions. We have the University of Minnesota. We have the University of St. Thomas, Macalester, Hamlin, many others. We have risk capital. We have people that are willing to invest money in the area. In terms of angel investors, there's Gopher Angels, Twin Cities Angels. There's a number of venture capital firms that either have a presence here or have people who are coming into this area. There's policymakers who are very much in support of this, and the entrepreneurship community is concentrated and growing. So I was really excited from what I've seen of the ecosystems in Silicon Valley, in London, in Boston, among others.
Right.
Minneapolis-St. Paul has all of the elements to succeed. I've heard it described as ready to launch. I've heard it described as anticipatory. There's this feeling that things are going to happen.
Right.
Where we struggle in this area is in creating the connections between those stakeholders in the ecosystem. And a lot of that goes back to our culture and our regional identity, and a lot of it goes back to our history. One of the advantages that we have in Minnesota is that we're not focused on just a single industry.
Yeah.
We have strengths in food processing, we have strengths in high technology, we have strengths in retail, and many others. And because of that, if workers can move across those industries and create those connections outside of the area in which they started, then you have the opportunity to learn. You might find something in high tech that translates to retail, something in retail that translates to food processing, something in food processing that translates to medical device development, which is another huge and growing area here.
Right.
So it's really building those connections.
And to be able to think out of the box.
Right.
Yeah.
Historically in Minnesota, though, we're a little worried about risk.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily want to step outside of our box And so there's a tendency for those who have started in retail to stay in retail. The more that we can do to encourage those connections, those bridges between industries, across industries, the more we'll start to see those connections built, not only between the corporations, but between the supporting stakeholders in the ecosystem. The capital to invest in new businesses, the academic institutions where we're saying there are skills that are transferable across industries. We want these to be something we can learn, something we can teach.
And from a women entrepreneurship perspective, what is it that we can do to increase the percentage of women entrepreneurs in Twin Cities?
With women entrepreneurs, let me actually share a little story with you first, and then I'll answer your question. But there was a study done at MIT on who was the most likely to get funding. And the study looked at 4 different types of people. It looked at a handsome man, an ugly man, or a sloppy-looking one, a beautiful woman, or an ugly or sloppy woman. And they looked at the ability of each of those to get funding. The first was the sloppy or not so well-dressed man was most likely. Think Mark Zuckerberg. Think wearing a hoodie to the venture capital interview. Yeah. The second was a handsome man. The third was an ugly woman or a sloppy woman. And the fourth was a beautiful or well-dressed woman. So if you look at that from the context of your question, women are at a disadvantage in getting funding, just to start, from our male counterparts. Part of that is our willingness to take risk. Part of that is simply that most of the funding goes to people who look like the people who are supplying the funding.
Right.
We tend to hire people who look like us. We tend to talk to people who look like us. It turns out we also tend to invest in people who look like us. And so that's a big hurdle to start.
Yeah.
One of the second hurdles is that we as women really struggle with taking a risk in our careers, whether it be from a fear of failure or simply not having the time to pursue it, or even believing that we don't have the time to pursue it. So being willing to take that risk of failure, being willing to put ourselves out there and say this might work or it might not, but either way I will have tried something and I will feel better for trying it, is a really big step for women. It's part of the networks that we build are support networks. If we feel strong in those support networks, we're willing to go a little bit further out.
Right.
If we feel like those networks are weak or we don't have the support that we need to go further, we're going to draw inward.
Right. Yep.
There's a number of organizations in the Twin Cities that are doing some amazing things to encourage women entrepreneurs. The Minnesota Cup, to start, has done some incredible programming work with women entrepreneurs, reaching out and targeting them specifically for Minnesota Cup for the entry point this year. The Sophia Fund is a women-led and women-raised venture capital fund that again targets and encourages women entrepreneurs. They have 2 funds, I believe. I think their first fund closed out and invested in 7 or more companies, and they're working on their second fund right now. So for me, that's really encouraging. First, that these 5 amazing women started this, and second, that they had so much success to start that they started another fund.
Right, and there are these resources out there, and making that connection between people who need it with people who want to provide it.
That's exactly it. And I think organizations like Girls in Tech, like Twin Cities Geekettes, number of other fantastic groups in the Twin Cities have the ability to offer that support. It's a matter of reaching out and being willing to take it.
Right, exactly.
Women don't like to admit we make mistakes. And we also sometimes don't want to say we need help.
We need help, exactly.
But the first thing we need to do as entrepreneurs, and an entrepreneur isn't just someone starting a business.
Yeah.
An entrepreneur is someone who has a passion for change.
Yes.
The first thing we need to do in that passion is say, I can't do it by myself. Who do I need to help?
Exactly. Perfect, yeah. All right, so any advice for young women who are getting into this science and technology field and are considering going into the science and technology field, do you have any career advice for them?
I do. It's very simple. It's really kind of a two-part advice. The first part is be willing to take a risk. Try something that you're not very good at and be willing to ask for help. The second part of that is be willing to fail. Encourage you to do things that will help you fail early, fail often, be comfortable with failure, and recognize that it doesn't define you. And I would say over the course of my career, I've had opportunities to fail over and over again, and I've learned the most from those failures. Going back to my high school times, I had one teacher who gave us pass-fail tests in chemistry. And they were simple tests. We were just doing things like sodium sulfate, calcium carbonate. You had to learn the names of the ions and the symbols that went with them. And I failed the test. And I was crushed. And the teacher said, it's not a big deal. You can take it again. And I failed it again. And I sat there in her laboratory, just burst into tears, because I'd never failed anything before. And she said, it's not a big deal. Just take it again. And I did. I dried the tears. I passed it the third time. But the point was that unless you recognize that failure, and that failure doesn't define you,
Right.
it's going to tear you down the first time it happens. So being willing to try things that are difficult and uncomfortable and that seem impossible gives you a chance to not only fail and be comfortable with it, but also to have that amazing feeling when you do succeed.
Yes, absolutely. So take risks and fail early,
Take
fail
risks
often.
and fail early and fail often. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. It has been lovely speaking with you.
Thank you, Pallavi. It's been a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Professional Spotlight. Please don't forget to visit our website, www.GiTMSP.org, and don't forget to subscribe to our e-newsletter. Special thanks to University of St. Thomas for providing us the space. Thank you.